Okay, well, we're sort of capping off this semester by talking about reporting and talking about how reporting to committees and reporting coming out of the healthcare facilities leadership scope of responsibilities. What does it look like? What kind of requirements are there? And again, we're using the EC Essentials and the Joint Commission guidelines as our tool. And as we talk about reporting, again, this is one of those things where, as a healthcare facility leadership professional, in another course, maintenance and operations, we talk about the collection of data and data collection and the power of databases, and we talked about analytics and reports and dashboards, and we're going to touch on that a little bit today. In fact, I'll be using material from that presentation inside of this presentation. But again, reporting is a culmination of your efforts, and when we do it well, we're able to. Reporting is kind of our capstone in a way. When we take our reports and we summarize and we analyze and we format, and then we sit there and we put that into our reviews, we now have something to go back to year after year to build on and to show our efforts. And this is, again, particularly important during the accreditation surveys and other surveys, as well as other areas. So we're gonna go kind of granular here when it comes to reporting. We'll be into the EC Essentials a little bit, and we'll be talking about some of the different reports. And I'll also be sharing with you some of the methodologies I developed over the years to be more effective as a safety officer. Many of you who will be in small organizations to medium organizations will wear multiple hats, and one of the hats you possibly will wear, and maybe likely will wear, is safety officer. What you'll find when it comes to the environment of care standards, most facilities, managers, and directors have responsibility of somewhere between 3 to sometimes all 5 areas of responsibility. When you think about security, equipment, utilities, you get into, again, the safety officer role and hazardous materials. Sometimes all those positions report direct, and fire and life safety, all those report directly to the facilities person, and so you end up getting the safety officer role. And you may even get the luxury of having emergency management, and if you do, then you have all 7 areas of responsibilities, and you very much are likely will be the safety officer. So you'll have all of this material to be responsible for. So I'm kind of preparing you for that. I've had that role in medium facilities to small facilities. I imagine in large facilities, as I've talked to my peers, their scope narrows quite a bit. However, they still need to report up and be aware and understand the responsibilities of reporting and the safety committee and safety officer role. So we're going to start with, we're going to talk value of reporting. There are a number of things that we want to cover when it comes to the required reports. However, what's the value? Well, safety. If you're looking and analyzing data, you're certainly going to start seeing trends and variances that will allow you to change processes or create educational opportunities for safety issues. There's no doubt over the years, I can't begin to tell you the number of safety implications and safety solutions that came out of reporting and out of committees. Obviously, process improvement, which goes right along with it. When you do reporting, you're going to improve processes, or you should. Again, for the same reason. And educational comes right out of that. If you're going to change processes, you're going to be doing education. You might be doing additional training. It certainly does create lots of educational development. The networking across the organization. We've talked about multidisciplinary committees and other courses and the importance of them, and it's even more important now than it's ever been. But when you do reporting, you certainly will be working with other folks, clinical, non-clinical, administrative, financial, across the organization, and it'll help expand your network. Demonstrates value, no doubt about it. If you're sitting there creating solutions, resolving problems, and that's something that will certainly be observed and should be valued. Job performance. Again, this really should be part of your job description for any HFL professional. I don't know how it cannot be. And this is a great opportunity for you to be able to take and present this for your evaluations, which leads to the next thing, which is career development. Again, as you become known as a strong analyzer and a change agent and a performance improvement kind of person within your organization, which should be a natural outgrowth from reporting, then there certainly can be career development opportunities. And if anything, it will enhance your career, if not create career paths for you. So these are just a handful of the main things that the value of reporting creates. I think you can see the power behind reporting and the potential behind reporting. The requirement for reporting, and again, reporting isn't just something you do for those reasons I mentioned before. It is required in many cases, and we're going to touch on that today. And the main reason it seems we're driven by reporting is accreditation. We should not be driven by accreditation. However, it definitely does keep us honest. Obviously, authorities having jurisdiction, they expect a certain, sometimes they're not so much into reports as they are into summaries or into the data. They want to see that you have that checklist done. They want to see that PM was done, or that service work request was followed up on, and they're not sometimes as in tune to reporting. State surveys, again, very much like accreditation, and sentinel events. No doubt when something bad happens, when someone is injured or dies in healthcare and it's involved a utility or a piece of medical equipment or otherwise, there are definite requirements. We'll talk in a little bit about something called SMDA, Safe Medical Device Act, which is a requirement for reporting, and that is a federal requirement. Types of reports. Again, we're going to get into a little more of the essentials here. Utilities, EC 01, 01, 01, EP 8. Again, that is the requirement for annual review of the management plan, which inside that management plan is all the things that you measure for your programs. We set what we call objective, scope, performance, and effectiveness. So each one of these is similar. Life safety, again, and fire. 01, 01, 01, EP6. It's actually under fire when you look at the actual EP. However, life safety and fire are so very close to each other that I often lump these two together. I know that they can often be broken out. Equipment management, and again, this is where I mentioned SMDA, but EC 0101, EP7. The Safe Medical Device Act, again, that's a federal requirement that when someone gets injured or dies, if someone dies, there's mandatory reporting to SMDA, and it's called Safe Medical Device Act. When someone gets injured, it does make it optional, but recommended. And this is one of those things where this should be something that should be reported on. Of course, when something happens, it should be reported, but it needs to be something that should be in your actual report every month that says, no SMDA incidents. Again, they are rare, but if you don't put it there, then you may just as well forget that it's a requirement. Construction has a standard EC 02, 06, 05, which talks about basically risk assessments needing to be completed, which again should be generated into a report. And then emergency management, EM 01, 01, that whole section talks about the management plan and hazard vulnerability assessments and reviews, again, that need to be done. Security, EC 01, 01, 01, EP4, again, another annual review of that plan. The safety committee or safety officer, or also it calls up under general safety, requires a review under EP 01, 01, EP3. And then hazardous material has its requirement for management plan and review 01, 01, EP5. I put two more down here, types of reports. While they're not, quote, required reports, they're the kind of reports or kind of information you do want to be including in reports that you do. And since this is sort of more of a safety presentation, and typically you wouldn't report financials and you really wouldn't report customer service at those safety, risk, quality. But I just wanted to drop them in here because sometimes I think we get a little myopic and when we generate reports, we need to understand that we got to balance ourselves as professionals, and the financial and the customer service information when it comes to running our business and reporting up to our administrators or our board or whoever else in the organization, that while no doubt the required reports we just went over are absolutely critical, these other two from a business perspective are also absolutely critical. And I think there can be a sense of feeling a little overwhelmed at times because we do have so many responsibilities. But if we put good systems and good processes in place, again, these all together will work to create a very balanced career for us and a very professional, it will produce very professional type information that will allow us to continue to grow and develop over the years, because all of these things shift and change a little bit in time. But if we put a foundation down, those little adjustments aren't so hard to make. But I just want to make sure I mention financial and customer service, even though they're not required reports and they don't really have a code or a compliance implication. Reporting methods. Again, this is something that I said we were going to talk about before. And there are 3 types, and this really comes from a presentation that I did earlier: analytics, summaries, and dashboards. And the next couple slides, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go over those. And I think I'm going to keep the same information that I had from my previous presentation in these. So it'll be a little bit won't fit quite as tight as if I was doing it specific to safety. But again, it generally gives the overview. And if you've seen these already, again, it won't hurt to see them again. But it just reviews what are each of these, what do they look like, and in a way, how do you use them? Analytics. Analytics are pretty much your trend lines, your pie charts, your bar graphs. In front of this is raw data, just the numerics, just raw numbers. But when you get to analytics, it's the stuff that you get to look at and analyze. This allows you to see trends and variances. You may use histograms or bar graphs or different variation of bar graphs or pies or line graphs to analyze the direction of your data. Is it stable? Is it completing 90% consistently? Are we hitting 100% consistently? Is my project repair corrective or PM percentages balanced? Are we shifting to a lot more project and a lot less repair? So this is analytics. It's the data being crunched into this kind of a format so you can analyze it. And to be candid, in my career, I kind of thought analytics was a high level. This is the information I presented at high level meetings, and I have since learned, of course, that this is really information that you use so you can analyze and make decisions. This is more internal. It can be used for meetings and other things, but typically, most folks, this is too much information, which is kind of funny because the raw data back in the day is the information I thought was a little too much information, and I thought this was the easy high level stuff. But it turns out that even graphs and bar graphs and pie charts sometimes can be a little too much data for making decisions and with decision makers. But from analytics to reports, and this is, again, once you've taken a look at your data and you've looked at your graphs, your graphs and your charts and your pies, you need to combine analytics with a summary. You need to say, what is it saying? What direction is it going? Why did it change? What happened here? When you see a variance or a trend, you really need to drill deeper, and you need to look at the raw data and find out what is it. And then you need to make your expert opinion or summary. And these summaries don't need to be long. In fact, they really shouldn't be long. They should be pretty much maybe never more than a paragraph. Occasionally, maybe more, dependent upon if there is a lot more technical stuff going on there you need to explain. But really, as a HFL leader, you get the data, you look at the data, you summarize the data, you analyze it. And these are the kind of reports then that then go up to folks like the Safety Committee, or your continuous CQI, Continuous Quality Improvement Committee, or maybe your risk committees. Probably all three in some cases. But this is the information that you report up. You report these summaries, and you usually report these on some kind of a regular basis. I guess safety committees are meant to meet at least 6 times a year. Most frequently, they often meet 12 times a year. But this is the kind of report that should be going to that committee, every month. And you should be writing those summaries. And at the end of the year, it makes it very easy to look at the history, and also makes it much easier to see trends. The next is dashboards. And dashboards really are, it seems like a catchphrase today, and I know many of you have heard it or seen it and experienced it, but they're very, very visual. It's high level, and when we say high level, we're talking about this is the type of stuff that is really going to your administrators or to people who just don't have time for data. They just want to see a quick reference, and they want to make decisions. This is very decision driven, a very high level decision driven, decision making. So dashboards are designed to, again, be not so much, what's funny is it takes a lot of data to get to a dashboard. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of dashboards now. Okay, let's start looking at a dashboard example now. First thing you notice when you look at this dashboard is you notice the colors. You see the green, yellow, and red. I'll tell you one thing that I would change about this dashboard already initially looking at it is I would put the green, yellow, and red all to the same side if it were possible. You'll notice that some of these have the green to the left and some of them have the red to the left. But I would actually change that however I could. I'd make sure that was consistently, so that way even visually it looks the same. But having done that, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to look at red. What's red? So what do we see first in red? Well, let's look at the first column here. And you notice the second row, you got this PM work order completion versus open, sitting at 34%, targets 95%, and the variance is, wow, 61%. So what's going on here? Well, it could be a simple example, a simple question. This could be a weekly dashboard, and this is the first week of the month. Or maybe it's the second week of the month. Or maybe it's the third week of the month, or maybe it's the end of the month. I hope this is not the end of the month, because if it is, then guess what? We got a major issue with getting PMs done. If it's the first week of the month, I would be quite satisfied. I had a PM program called 30-60-90. We would complete 30% the first week, 60 the second, 90 the third, and 10% the last week. Because the last 10% were always the hardest to get to, and if you save too many PMs for the last week of the month, which often happened, you start pushing away all your corrective work orders and everything else. And what would happen is your first week of the next month, you'd be caught catching up work orders again and get behind all over again. So if this were the second week of the month and it would be my 30-60-90 program, I would actually be changing things right now. We'd say, okay folks, this week we're going to have some additional overtime, or we're going to reschedule, or we're going to reshuffle staffing, or we're going to put more people. We would make changes. There would be action based upon this number if this were the second, third, fourth, or really, if this was at the end of the month, we've got a major problem. We got to figure out what happened last month. And hopefully it didn't wait till last month, the month to get over to realize that we were down this far on PMs. The second red indicator is over here. And we're sitting here, this is mean time between failure. Now, I'm not sure what system we're talking about here. Maybe it's utilities. And that would make sense. Maybe this is utility mean time between failure rate. I certainly wouldn't want frequent failures in utilities, although we probably would expect it. You notice the current value it's 32 days, target is 90 days, and the variance is 58. But again, let's say it's utilities, and let's say what's going on here is we're into a stormy period. It's spring. Well, maybe this is not the right target value, or maybe it is. But whatever it is, it's in the red, and I'd want a summary and explanation of what's going on with this one. And hopefully there would be a good data, good detail as to why we're sitting there at that rate. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the yellow. First one we see is over here, overtime versus regular hours. And current value is 13%, the target's 9%, and the variance here actually should be, actually target's 5%. and the variance is 8%. And actually, I'm a little surprised. Well, that's not too bad, I guess. But again, it's something to keep an eye on. We certainly want to try to adjust that if we can, and maybe there's a normal explanation, but we had vacation time going on. Maybe we had some type of an outage. Again, if I go back and I look at my mean time between failure rate over here, maybe these are tied together. Maybe we had an outage or utility outage that required more overtime. So they work perfectly together. That makes some sense. The next one we see that's in yellow is over here, and that is work orders overdue. And again, the current value is 103, and the target is 15 work orders. And the variance is pretty significant. We're looking at 88 work orders that are beyond our target value. Wow, okay. So again, we see here that our PMs are behind. We have a bunch of extra work orders. So what's going on here? Maybe we need overtime, and maybe that's why our overtime is even maybe eking up a little bit. We're eking up overtime because it's going to go a little higher maybe because we have our behind on our PMs. We have a lot of work orders overdue. And if you notice over here where we're not in the yellow, actually we actually are based on our target. We're on the edge here, backlog hours. So we can see with our backlog hours that we're getting behind. So what does this dashboard tell us? Well, it tells us we got some operational variances going on, and maybe we need to make some adjustments right now. In fact, we would need to make some adjustments right now, and we need to let the administration know, or our report know, that we're going to be having to do some changes to get caught up. The other ones that are in green and meeting target, you can tell that, hey, okay, things are fine. No reason to discuss them unless somebody wants to discuss them. It looks like, if you want to look at those real quick, our total maintenance cost for budget, we're looking pretty good. We're actually under our target. If we look at our actual to estimate cost variance, again, we're doing pretty good. Our costs, we're managing our money. PM work orders overdue, again, we're doing well here. We're staying within our target. And then the last indicator over here, work orders waiting for approval. Again, we're a little bit over our target. Our target is 10. We're at 20. Variance is 10. Not a major concern. Again, we allow ourselves some room from target. So this is a good example of a dashboard. And again, it can help you make some quick decisions and make some quick adjustments. This here is a combination report. This combines all three elements that we talked about today. So if we look at here, we got our analytics. Here's our trend lines and our bar graphs, and we can see all these lines going. And actually, there's no trend lines here. These are just graphs month to month to month. And we can see, look at this. You see this red line here? Look at this over here. Uh-oh. Looks like it's trending. Boy, that's definitely trending. Now it's staying up here. What is that line? And then again, you can see the header down here, and I can't quite read that. But again, this was not a specific healthcare maintenance summary, but it is something that we would want to look at. What's going on there. And there's raw data. Okay, and it says here, it actually gives the term that looks like I'm not sure what that word is. But anyway, it looks like we definitely start trending up. We see the raw data 3, 4, 3, 6, 9, 12, 9, 12, 9, 9, 9, 8, 9, 9. And this says worst 5 equipment for month. And equipment for the top 5 low systems. So aligner, whatever the aligner is, needs some attention. And then we look over here, and we got some of our bar graphs or histograms, okay, giving us more data. And then that data is converted over into something that's a little more color-coded, drawing our attention to it. But then it draws itself up to a dashboard. And we can look at the dashboard and again, look at our reds and look at our yellows and look at our greens, and we can start making some decisions. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. Maybe it's a normal variance. But whatever, no matter what, you need to explain it. So you would look at those reds and you would explain what's going on here. And again, you'd want to let people know, is this a concern or is this not a concern? Do we need to pay attention to it? What do we need to do? And it gives you a very easy vehicle, but mind you, all this is driven by what? Good data. So they go hand in hand. You can't do one really without the other. But imagine the power of these reports. Imagine the ability to influence good decisions and not have to walk into the room and just try to explain it verbally. Or for that matter, walk into the room with, if you will, a bunch of data. Because again, people get kind of blurry-eyed when they look at data and graphs and charts. They don't necessarily can't interpret them. You really need to be able to do these reports, and you need to be able to articulate and summarize reports like this. But again, as I've said more than once already, it's driven by excellent data. The next subject is decision making and follow-up. And we've been talking about that throughout as we looked at these reports. Again, you've got to understand a trend and a variance. When things are trending, because you're so operational, because you're looking at the data firsthand, because you understand the data, you need to explain and see the trends before anyone else does. And variances are a little different. Obviously, a lot of people can see that when something big happens. But again, is the variance something explainable? Is it something that could happen again? Was there a potential risk? What kind of risk is there? And what kind of action? And this should result in action. When you look at trends and variances, there should be some action. There has to be action. There has to be some intentional written justification, or some change in process, or some change in staffing or management or training. Something has to change when you see this. Again, a summary report may be all there needs to be, monitoring the situation for that matter, or very explainable. Again, changes in policies, improvement of processes. Again, result in training, and it could also be results in discipline. This helps you to see if something is happening over and over and over again because someone is either intentionally or actively or passively aggressive on a situation, and I've seen all those. You need to follow up. It needs to result in a verbal conversation or a written conversation or decision-making leave or whatever it might escalate to. But again, it really does help you manage and bring people in and keep people moving in the right direction. But it's so critical to do something with the data. You have to do something with the data. Can't stress that enough. We're going to go over some examples now of these different reports. And there's a lot of elements of performance and standards inside of these. I'm not going to cite those. We may make that part of an assignment. In fact, we've been making that actually part of assignments we've been doing. And again, we're going to continue to peel this, put another layer on this onion, another layer on this onion as time goes on. But let's talk about some examples of what's included in some reports. So we talk about utility reports. And what do we do with utility reports? Well, obviously preventive maintenance is information we would present in our utility reports. We would talk about failure and disruptions. For example, our generators, ICRA related, failure disruptions, medical gas, anything patient related, construction. Going back up to preventive maintenance, again, there are many requirements, particularly when it comes to our electrical system and our medical gas systems, that we would be including in our preventive maintenance reports. Whenever we get the generator serviced, or we again working on the medical gas system, we would have those things included in our reports. And we put planned events. Again, whenever we have a planned outage or disruption, or we are looking to make some kind of a transition in a utility system, we would want to include that inside of our utility report. So while this looks fairly straightforward, there's a lot of data and a lot of information and a lot of work orders and a lot of preventive maintenance that goes into our utility reports. One of the things that I often would lose sight of from time to time would be the periodic servicing of our main power switchgear coming in. It was always a complex service where you needed to go through and you needed to go back and check, your commercial power coming in. and I believe the requirement, and I don't have that in front of me, but I believe that requirement was every 3 years or so you had to go through and do that. And that was one of the ones that often would kind of slip, not so much slip by me, but it'd be like we'd be thinking, oh, that's due again. And ironically, we always end up putting that into the PM system. The facilities I was at, it was never in the PM system, and we would put it in the PM system, and then we wouldn't have any problems anymore. But it seemed like we'd almost always miss a cycle when it came to that type of service. Life safety examples, again, fire, life safety. Fire extinguishers is a constant, and that's that's one of those ones where everyone tries to figure out who should do the fire extinguishers. I've really came down to the place where I feel like security should be doing fire extinguishers. It's a month in and month out requirement. It's a 100% requirement. It's a very due diligent requirement. It's one of those things where whoever's on it just has to realize that it is very, very, very critical and important. That was the hardest, I think one of the biggest challenges I had handing it over to security, is that sometimes, for some reason, and I couldn't explain it, the security manager or supervisors never really saw checking fire extinguishers as critically important. And it seemed like every so often we would have to have a conversation about missed fire extinguishers or not keeping up on top of them. And I think it has a little bit to do with, sometimes this is where you get into some issues when you have you hire security people that are ex-law enforcement. They see fire extinguishers as something that firemen do, and their police or security. So that's a challenge I've seen. But again, I think it comes back down to the manager and the supervisor. If you say it needs to be done, you make it important, you follow up properly, it gets done. Fire systems, for example, fire panels, sprinkler, dampeners, fire system components, fire pump, on and on and on. These are fire life safety things that need to be included in your reports. Interim life safety measures. Interesting thing about interim life safety measures, it's not just the ones you put in place, it's the ones that remain in place, particularly for ones that are long term. If you've done a statement of condition or a plan for improvement on your building, and you've had to put you've added additional fire watch, then you need to add this. This needs to be in your report, month in and month out. You have to stay on top of your interim life safeties that stay in place for sometimes years at a time. Fire drills, again, need to be in your life safety report, and also any events that occur. Sometimes you have actual, obviously we can have actual fires, and it does definitely happen, particularly when it comes to people smoking in healthcare even though they're not supposed to be, or when it comes to because we have kitchens and because we have ORs, we often sometimes do have fire events still. When I say often, we can have fire events, I should say. So events would also absolutely be included in your life safety or fire reports. Equipment management, again, pretty comprehensive. And sometimes when we talk equipment management, most of us think biomedical equipment, but it is certainly not always biomedical or clinical equipment. It certainly can be both a combination of biomedical and also definitely a facilities equipment. And this is becoming even more critical because of the implications, as we'll talk in a moment, about ILSM and ICRIS. So repair completion rates, certainly that's a common reporting item. Open work orders, I put in here by risk. Certainly, if we have an open work order for checking some toasters or checking some microwaves, it certainly may not be as critical as open work orders and repair and services on some utility systems or medical gas systems, or equipment that functions inside of, let's say, our OR or other revenue generating environments or patient care environments. So by risk, I think that's a more critical piece, and probably even just high risk equipment. Open work orders is what should be reported up to safety committee. PM completion rates, again, when it comes to critical equipment or life safety equipment or ICRA equipment, it's 100%. We really don't have an option. And we don't hit 100%, we're not meeting our standards or codes. So when you think of that kind of equipment, that's your first priority. You have to have very good processes. You have to monitor your information very closely. It's one of those things where you definitely want to get done as early in the month as possible, so that way when you do your report, everything is done critical. The other equipment, of course, is also very critical, and typically 90% completion rates are standard for being adequate. Some people go to 95%. In your report, you want to have user training and could not duplicates. Again, when there are user training issues and could not duplicates, it's showing that you are effectively following up on what you're seeing. And then that, of course, leads to training and in-service. So, when you see user training and could not duplicates issues, actually I should have said user error or could not duplicate issues. The training and the in-service should follow. New installations and equipment. This is an interesting one. Whenever there is a major new installation or equipment change in your organization, let's say that they're trading out all the defibrillators, or maybe they're changing out all the infusion pumps, or maybe they're upgrading to a new type of furniture, even, or new beds, or something like that. When that happens, inevitably, there is a learning curve for the organization, and that can create implications for the patient. So that should be something that should be documented, new installations and equipment, and very often, and we're involved from a facilities perspective. Again, I mentioned Safe Medical Device Act. Again, that should be in every report, even if there's nothing that's happened. You have studied and learned and heard about sentinel events, again, when someone gets injured or dies in healthcare. Some people would say that near misses should also be included in sentinel events. That is not driven by language, by code. But near misses, obviously, if something else happened, it would have been a sentinel event. Some people do include near misses in their sentinel event reporting, but I think very few people do. And again, understand that the SMDA sentinel event is a very specific document with a very specific process that needs to be filled out and sent in. It's been some years since I filled one out, but I used to fill them out. I probably filled out about I'd say maybe a half dozen of them or so over my career for events that have occurred, and nothing where anyone died, but where people were injured. So it's a document you want to get some familiarity with. It's fairly straightforward, but you'll be working with your risk managers and your quality folks when that happens. So these are just some examples of equipment information that needs to be reported. Construction, again, whether you do this separately or include this as part of your facilities report, shutdowns should be reported, infection control risk assessments, interim life safety measures, those should and need to be reported, incidents that happen during construction. And I put timelines. It's always good because some projects can last obviously months and months and months, and in some cases they could last years, although that's a little bit unusual. I mean, if you're adding a new tower, if you're, some facilities have grown so much, especially through consolidation, to bring all the services back to one site, that the campus nearly goes by a third or doubles, and those can last years. So you want some timelines to kind of give people to keep up to date on what's happening and when things are going to be ramping up and when things are going to be closing down. It's always good to do that with construction projects. Emergency management exercises, there's a requirement, and I think that requirement might be shifting just recently. Right now it's 2 a year, 1 tabletop, 1 real, or 1 actual. One must include the community. And I put in here exercises, not drills, because back in the day they used to call these drills, and they changed it to exercises because the idea behind a drill and exercise was, if you think about like a fire drill back in the day, if you ever did fire drills for school or otherwise, these were nice little encapsulated events where nothing really bad happened. I mean, everyone just left the building, they waited outside, it was all cleared, they were brought back into the building, and you documented your drill. That's what we used to do our emergency drills too. We'd have a scenario, we'd set it up, we'd go through the exercise, we'd finish it, and everything was wonderful. We were like, okay, well, we successfully handled that hurricane or that tornado or that earthquake or that, multi-vehicle incident, mass casualty incident. And they were saying that there was a sense that we were not getting a lot of value out of that. And this goes back some years now. So they changed it from drills to exercises. People still put drill inside the vernacular, but I want you to have in your language exercise. And the idea behind exercise was they wanted you to push it to the point of exhaustion or failure. So you think about physical exercise, and you can run at top speed for a certain amount of time, and then there's a point you just can't run any further. And dependent upon your conditioning, dependent upon weather, dependent upon how you're feeling, dependent upon a lot of things, will vary how far and how long you can go. And that's exactly what they wanted to get across when it came to exercise versus drills. They wanted you to push your disaster exercise until it broke. And then when it broke, they wanted you to ask, well, why did it break? And then start evaluating, why did it break? So when it comes to emergency management, they want to see exercises that have failures. And then from the failures, they want to see action plans or performance improvement. Hazardous vulnerability assessment. Again, this is an annual requirement to look at, your potential type failures in your area or region, and then strategize and adjust your emergency management plan accordingly. Inventory requirements. There are requirements for stock for emergency plans, including potable water and different type of decon equipment, and even food supplies and medications and so on and so forth. There's an inventory that is required to be submitted and kept on hand. Training. Again, training is an ongoing emergency management requirement, and it should be documented and reported. So these are, again, some examples of emergency management and type of things you would report for emergency management. And behind all of these are certain elements of performance and requirements. Security. Again, there's a requirement for building assessments annually. And this is one that was always a little bit of a challenge, especially as you get more and more buildings, and they range around a region. What type of assessment you do for your hospital is going to be different than the assessment you do for a doctor's office that's 40 miles away, urban versus rural, and so on and so forth. I think sometimes we have a tendency maybe to overcomplicate these, but at the exact same time, I've also seen the tendency to make them too simple. But you need to do assessments. Of course, incidents and investigations. Again, I found this to be a challenge over my career. I found my security officers were good at identifying an incident, but then in terms of developing a good document or doing any kind of follow-up investigation, that's where things kind of fell down. One example, very clear example I had that I remember top of my head was I had walked outside and I saw and smelled what appeared to be gasoline, and it appeared to be all around a vehicle. And I went closer to the vehicle. I noticed on top of the vehicle almost like bubbling or pooling of gasoline, and around the vehicle there was gas all over on the ground around it. And I was like, what is going on here? This is not right. And so I went in and I started looking into it. Actually, what happened was somebody who was standing close by came over to me and said, yeah, I saw what happened. And I said, well, what happened? And they go, well, some person came over, some guy pulled up in a car, walked out with a big container of gasoline and poured it all over the vehicle, and then looks like he was going to do something, and then all of a sudden I think he got scared away or whatever, and he got his vehicle and he drove off. And the individual said, yeah, I got hold of security. And so I was kind of like, really? So I ended up talking to security, and sure enough, security said, yeah, I took the report that somebody had done that. But that's all that was done. Nothing else was done. And then so I did a little more investigation. I found out whose car it was. I found out that it was a domestic situation, an ex-boyfriend. Apparently the person had intended to obviously light the car up on fire, and ended up doing the follow-up on that. But I was shocked at, as I often have been, how sometimes security would just take just what happened at that moment, and then there'd be no follow-up. And I'd like to tell you that was a rare instance, but unfortunately, sometimes that was too common. A lot of security departments that I've unfortunately have had report to me see themselves as just sort of taking the picture, and that's pretty much it. And even the supervisor managers haven't had managers that were really, really strong at following up and doing investigations. So it's one of those things that we certainly wanted obviously we have an opportunity to do that. At the exact same time, I mean, security is often one of the departments that's often looked at for cutting and reductions, especially in these days and times. In some places it's actually increased because of the dangers and such wherever you are. But I have often said this is the way you show your value, is by counting and by investigating and by summarizing and by reporting. Because again, if you weren't here, who would be doing it, and what kind of risks would we would be taking on if you were not here? Helipad landings, FAA requirements. Again, there are very specific requirements, and depending on what type of facility you have and how it's set up and where is the pad. Obviously, we have situations where you're required to have fire suppression out at or near the landings, and very often security brings that out to the landings. They also have to do certain lighting things sometimes, and also have to clear the area to make sure that when helicopters are landing, they can disperse rocks and other kind of material that's laying on the ground, or cars are driving by. You have to create a perimeter, and these need to be documented, and we also have a checklist to show that we did everything appropriately. Secure areas, again, when it comes to hospitals, we have lots of rooms that need to be secured 24/7, whether it's pharmacies or IT or medication rooms or other areas like that. And security is the one that goes around and checks these areas, make they are secure. And it happens fairly frequently where they're not. For some reason, doors didn't latch properly, or someone didn't lock something, or something was found ajar or open, or maybe there was an alarm. So you really need to have a real good documentation and follow-up when it comes to the areas of the building. And then infant abduction exercises. Again, these are required to be done on a regular basis, and they should be well documented, and they should be submitted and reported. So these are examples of security reports that typically need to be reported for committees and for annual review. The Safety Committee, again, when it comes to the Safety Committee, and there are annual summaries that are required. And these summaries, again, we're going to go over what's involved in these summaries in just a little bit. But the areas that are required summaries are utilities, emergency management, fire, again, I combine it with life safety, medical equipment, hazardous materials, and security. The Safety Committee is required to document environmental rounds and performance improvement. So when it comes to an annual summary, the Safety Committee or Safety Officer is going to have to take all of these, compile them into one report. And so as standardized and as consistent as all these sub-reports are, is how easy or complicated it's going to be to do your annual summary for Safety Committee. And we're going to go over that and just go over that now. Inside of these summaries, there needs to be several things that they need to have standardized. They need to have their objective, their scope, their performance, their effectiveness, and there needs to be. And this is something that's outside of the EP that requires objective, scope, performance, effectiveness, but I include it with the overall summaries, and that is performance improvement, which comes from EC 04, 01, 03, EPs 1 through 3. And those three EPs basically say you need to analyze the data that you get, you need to identify issues as a result of analyzing that data and follow up on them, and at the end of the year, you need to establish goals or performance improvement. And so I think that that's a good way to cap off reports. And so I include it as part of the objective, scope, performance, and effectiveness. But now we're going to go over what is objective, scope, performance, and effectiveness. One more slide here. This is the EP 04, 01, 01, EP 15, and it says, every 12 months, the hospital evaluates each environmental care management plan, including a review of the plan's objectives, scope, performance, and effectiveness, which is really, again, all the details. And I cite the EPs here, and we'll cite those again for these in just a moment. So what is objective? Objective is the plan. What is the plan meant to accomplish? So what is your objective of this plan? And again, typically it doesn't have to be very, very big. If it's security, it's to create a secure environment for patients, staff, and visitors who enter the facility. That's the objective. Okay, it's simple, it's to the point, It's not really a big drawn out statement. Scope. Scope does get interesting because, and I put here, paint a picture in words of who, what, when, and where in quantifiable terms. In other words, what does this plan cover? What is the scope of the plan? How broad is it? And this does change. And this is one of those areas where I always ask people, what has changed in the last year? Have you added equipment? Have we added square footage? Have we lost equipment? Have we lost square footage? Has new things changed? New processes, new procedures? Are there new people we're covering now? Is there a different clientele? And so you're looking at the scope and you're kind of painting a picture of, well, what does this plan cover? Does it cover, this plan covers, this hospital and the surrounding county, including, ex-doctor's offices and behavioral health and rehabilitation, and our primary service area is X number of people with certain services. So when you paint scope, how big is your scope? How big of an area or how big of a person in terms of who, what, when, and where does this management plan cover? And again, it does change. It shrinks and it expands and it shifts over time. So that is what scope is, and it's really good, of course, to identify specific changes in your environment and your region, because that shows that you're paying attention to what's happening. For example, in the emergency management world, we had a natural gas ethanol plant that moved into the area within a few miles of the hospital, and they brought with it essentially a pretty serious potential for a disaster. So we would add that to our scope of our plan. And maybe that would affect, maybe our emergency department, or maybe that would affect our response and maybe some of the equipment we had available to us. But things like that is what you want to identify when it comes to scope. Performance, this is kind of what we're used to reporting when it comes to our plans. This really is all of the data that you collect, and you want to quantify, how's it going. So if you're doing a PM program or repair program or whatever it is, you report to your department benchmarks or incidents or otherwise. This is where you take that information and you have a dashboard. I think a dashboard would be very appropriate for something like this. And then you just summarize each part of that dashboard. Write a little paragraph on it. How is your performance? It doesn't have to be very wordy. It can just be to the point. You can say, we average a 6% completion rate month to month, which is beyond our 90% goal for general equipment. But for the year, we finished, we were 100% compliant, something like that. We satisfy the requirement for all of our interim life safety, critical equipment, and ICRA equipment at 100% as required. Things like that. And you have a chart or a graph or data or dashboard, and to help support that verbiage. Effectiveness. I guess I got ahead of myself just a little bit on that last one. What you do is you take everything, all the data, your performance, and you basically say, okay, how did this plan work for the year? Now, having put together your scope and your quality and your performance and everything else, now look back at the whole thing and say, okay, was it effective? Do I have an effective plan? Is things I put in place meeting the intent of my management plan here? And very often it is, because that's why you put it in place. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes you say, well, we really were. It was great. Everything went well. However, there were some issues. After I looked at all the data, there were some things that we might need to work on. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, because if everything is always status quo, you never have to work on anything. You might want to question whether or not you are really collecting quality information, because there isn't a healthcare institution in this country that isn't going through some kind of change, either through scope or through codes or standards or staffing or incidents or infection control or construction or otherwise, that there's some stuff that we need to work on and do a little better. So when you look at your effectiveness, there's really, I've seen all too often where people always want to just say everything was perfect, it was wonderful. The plan is perfect. Nothing needs to change. And I would challenge that. You may get a year or two where that's the case, but if it's going on year after year after year after year, and your summary is everything's wonderful, then again, just like we talked about with emergency management drills and exercises, you're probably really not paying attention to the right things, and you're probably not really improving your environment. And I don't think that's a stretch to say that. So when you do it, you're going to find some issues, and you should. And then that's going to lead to what needs to happen is there's an expectation in EC 04, 01, 03, EP3 that annually representatives from clinical, administrative, and support services recommend one or more priorities for improving the environment of care. As a safety officer, I would look at all of these plans and all these reports, and I would always ask people to put one or two opportunities for improvement based on either the data or based on goals and objectives they have. And so if you have these 5 or 6 reports coming in, and so you have 10 or 12 performance improvement opportunities, and you look at what the safety committee's been doing with environmental rounds and other things, it's very easy then to come back to the committee and say, okay, here's 1, 2, or 3 goals we're all going to work on together. And that's kind of fun in a way, because what happens is you can focus the energy of the committee on a goal. For example, let's say that utility management has a goal, and that means that everyone in that committee can help with utility management's goal. And these may be administrators and clinicians and folks from departments that don't necessarily have anything to do with utility management, but they bring their collective energy and the multidisciplinary focus to your problem. And I think that's a great way to get things done and do them well. And I've had, we always did 1 or 2 or 3 goals, and typically we got them done every year. And then year after year after year, after doing that for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, I mean, you've knocked out a lot of goals, and you've just then to knock them out, you put them to bed. I mean, lots of times when we put that kind of thinking and energy into a goal, we did it really, really well, so well that it was fixed and it never came back. And I have seen in other committees where they talk about fixing things, they kind of do a half measure response, and then next thing you know, they're talking about the same problem a few years later. So I think it's a great way to kind of get them knocked out, bring everyone's focus to a couple of goals, and really it's driven by these reports. So if your report, and you do a really good report, and you have a goal or two and things you really want to fix, you can find the support in a good safety committee to help get it knocked out. I guess that's the final slide. That's all there is to it. So this is the summary on healthcare facility leadership reporting. I hope that, again, as you've gone through this, some of you, again, will find yourself, I have no doubts whatsoever, you'll find yourself as the safety officer or over the safety committee. Certainly all of you, if you are in a management role or a leadership role, will be part of a safety committee. I can't see that. Maybe a handful of you, maybe, because you're in very large organizations, wouldn't be. But I would say that nearly all of you should be, if you're working in healthcare, in facilities leadership, will be part of a safety committee. And this will give you an appreciation for what that safety officer is needing to coordinate. And hopefully you can contribute at your meetings to standardize these processes and standardize these reports and provide good quality information to that safety officer. Because at the end of the day, again, just talking about cooperation again, what's your goal? Well, our goal is to make the people around us better, make them smarter. We do not want to be the best in the room, because if we are, then where do we have to go? So it's nice to be helping other people get better. It makes us better. And again, if you're contributing and helping that safety committee and that safety officer make that committee valuable and intentional, then of course you're going to do. You're going to be a big part of making the environment better for the patient and the staff and the visitors and anyone else that enters that building. And this is the summary on reporting for the HFL program.